Ingve Malmsteen?
Malmsteen.
Malmsteen.
Mainstream, yes.
Now, I know what many of you are asking. Who in the piping hot fuck are Alcatrazz? To put it succinctly, Alcatrazz are easily the most important and seminal band that 90% of you have never fucking heard of. The band that launched the careers of both Steve Vai and the subject of Metal Mythos episode number 2, the immortal Yngwie Malmsteen, while simultaneously cementing the legend of rainbow luminary Graham Bonnet. This is something I've wanted to do for quite a while. You see, there are many, many metal bands throughout the 80s and beyond who are, in a musical sense, eminently worthy of having their careers chronicled in an episode of Metal Mythos, but who, for whatever reason, do not have a large enough musical catalog to devote a full hour-long Mythos episode to. So call this whatever you like. Metal Mythos Mini, Metal Micro Mythos, call it a grilled cheese sandwich for all the fuck I care, so long as we at last have an opportunity to celebrate the storied career of the bygone badasses Alcatrazz. But this story would be incomplete without its prologue, because Alcatrazz had its genesis with the pulverizing proto-power metal of Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. When Graham Bonnet arose from the 60s mop-top doo-wop of his Bee Gees-produced musical project The Marbles, who enjoyed fleeting top 10 UK chart success with a forgotten hit Only One Woman, he shortly thereafter embarked on a less-than-sterling solo career. He re-recorded Bob Dylan's standards, employed songwriters to pen original material, but despite having a voice that could drive a fucking hurricane back into the sea, solo success was more elusive than Kim Kardashian's shame. And then, the great Ronnie James Dio left Rainbow. By this point, Ritchie Blackmore had played the role of starving artist for quite long enough and was ready to rake in the pop metal payola, which left Dio's fucking Gandalf metal caught between the moon and Ritchie Blackmore's ego.
Roger became Ritchie's conduit, so he came to me and told me what Ritchie would like, that could I stop writing in such a fantasy-oriented way and maybe write some love songs, and of course my reply was no, and that was it. Goodbye.
While Dio shacked up with Tony Iommi and Black Sabbath, the hunt was on for a new Rainbow singer, and during an alcohol-fueled brainstorming stupor, bassist and songwriter Roger Glover threw on a Marbles record, and like anyone at all with taste, Ritchie sat up and said, "That voice, that one, right the fuck there!" Then the rock and roll equivalent of James fucking Dean saunters into the recording studio, and Ritchie's jaw hit the floor.
Ritchie Blackmore didn't like your short hair or something? You wanted to pull a guitar?
Yeah, if I wanted to upset him, I had my hair cut. And I know he didn't like the way I was, the way I dressed and stuff, but he wanted me for what was in here, not was, you know, not the clothes and the hair, you know. So they took me for my voice, not for my fashion or whatever.
Yeah.
You know.
He may not have looked the part, but he sure as shit sounded it. Hitting dog whistle notes Ronnie James Dio couldn't even catch a faint whiff of even in his prime, and at full fucking voice no less, without an overt reliance on falsetto endemic to untold legions of heavy metal frontmen before and after, and without even a fucking microphone, if legend is to be believed.
He said, well, okay, do you want to sing this song? And I was really frightened of really, messing it up, so I didn't sing on microphone. And this Miss Treaty thing is kind of like a big bluesy type thing. And so I stood back from the microphone, and the guys said, well, you've got the job, but do you want to sing on microphone this time? We can hear you, but he said, but could you stand on the microphone?
Look, I love Dio. Elf, Rainbow, Sabbath, or solo, but Dio? couldn't sing that if he wanted to. Whatever your feelings on the resultant Down to Earth album, Rainbow's most commercially successful release to that point, for the record, there can be no debate over the fact that Graham Bonnet carved an inimitable niche for himself in the bedrock of Rainbow lore, paving the way in the process for the even more commercial climbs of the Joe Lynn Turner era, an era I routinely argue might have been even more successful had Graham Bonnet elected to remain behind the mic. But hey, opinions, assholes, and so forth. After departing Rainbow, Graham Bonnet seemed to pinball the fuck from project to project, cutting a frankly superb early 80s pop record entitled Lineup, before enjoying a turn at the wheel for the Michael Schenker group that was as brief as it was controversial, at the final show for which Graham accidentally rocked out with his cock out. Fucking literally.
What really happened between you and the Michael Schenker band?
It's a kind of long story.
I don't want to get too personal here.
A lot of things happened on stage that night that shouldn't. It was very unfortunate. For instance, my fly bust. This is why I wear these now. I had a zipper pair of jeans, and the thing went.
Oh, is that?
Out came, Brewer's droop there.
Wow.
No, it's just it happens all the time. You hear about people walking off stage or whatever. Yeah. Not because of their naughty bits coming out of their jeans, but that's what happened to me. That was the finisher. I said, oh Christ! I just had to go. I was like, shit. I was trying to get it back in, and people said, oh, he was playing with his cock, this but I was just going, I've got to get it, and it wouldn't go back in.
His future uncertain in the glory days of the Bonnet Rainbow lineup still splayed across FM radio the world over, even to this day, quite frankly. He marshaled a few close friends and decided if he couldn't rejoin the band he'd helped establish as a commercial powerhouse, he'd attempt to make one of his own. Enter Alcatrazz.
They'd be setting up the speakers and the instruments, and he used to say, Howie, bring the birds in. And I was the Birdman for Alcatrazz. So ladies and gentlemen, Rock Palace is proud to present Alcatrazz.
Having moved from dreary old England to the more verdant climes of Hollywood, Graham Bonnet threw himself into the thriving Sunset Strip metal scene feet fucking first. His greatest successes having come with Rainbow, he deliberately set about to make a band in the Rainbow mold, a fiery, virtuosic five-piece with a strong keyboard undercurrent. He'd already linked up with bassist Gary Shea and keyboard player Jimmy Waldo, and during auditions, former Alice Cooper drummer Jan Uvina, who played with Alice during perhaps his most bizarre, experimental new wave period on, I believe it was Zipper Catches Skin. Well, we'll get to that saga in a later Mythos. But what good is forming the 80s answer to Rainbow without your very own personal Richie Blackmore? Graham Bonnet and the gang set out to find just that. But on passage to India, they inadvertently landed on the guitar equivalent of the New Fucking World when someone introduced them all to Yngwie Malmsteen.
Later on, I wanted a band of my own that was pretty much like a Rainbow thing. And that's when Yngwie came along, and somebody told me about it.
He was really young, right?
Yeah, he was 19, I think. Yeah, no, 20, because I remember we celebrated his 21st birthday party. And he got this call from us, and he thought it was a joke. He thought, no. He said, no, what, Graham wants me to play with his band, because he was a big fan of Rainbow, and Richie, obviously. And then he came along, he played just like Richie Blackmore, just as well. He looked like Richie Blackmore, so it was like Rainbow Mark II,
And on the inaugural outing, No Parole from Rock and Roll, the vast majority of which was written by the young Swedish guitar prodigy, Malmsteen's playing has never been quite so blistering or pristine, but perhaps most importantly, it's got the one thing Yngwie's very first solo album, Rising Force, fucking didn't, and that X factor, my friends, is fucking songwriting, particularly the best track, an anti-nuclear anthem by the name of Hiroshima Mon Amour, an unflagging ode to the bravery and determination of the survivors of the Hiroshima nuclear assault. While I'm not some historical revisionist who considers the attacks unnecessary or a war crime, given that the imperialist regime of Tojo was outright training women and children to fight to the death in the streets with broomsticks to repel the Allied invasion rather than entertain the notion of surrender, I will say on camera, to your face, and for all time, Harry S. Truman saved a fuck of a lot more lives than he took by dropping those bombs, but all the same, the courage and resolve of the Japanese people to emerge anew in the shadow of a nuclear specter should serve as an example example of bravery to the entire human race. It's that feeling precisely that the iron lungs of Graham Bonnet so pristinely captures on Hiroshima Mon Amour. No withering Jeff Scott Soto falsetto, just untrammeled, face-melting, planet-smashing power. As for the worst track, I'm gonna have to give that to the aimless radio ballad Suffer Me. It's not the worst I've heard, but it sure as fuck ain't inspired either. With the opening salvos of the Alcatrazz assault, it appeared Bonnet and the boys had somehow managed to cage Yngwie's fury. But one thing they couldn't control was how the public would perceive it. What began as a vehicle for Graham Bonnet by the end of a grueling Japanese tour was rapidly devolving into a backing band for Yngwie Malmsteen. And as his solos and guitar fills became increasingly indulgent and self-serving, Graham Bonnet famously lashed out on stage, leading to one of the most epic public meltdowns of a band in the history of heavy metal.
Right. This big solo I have after a song called Queen Corey, I start my solo, everybody else walks off stage, all of a sudden my guitar goes dead. And for some reason I thought it could be anything, but I thought, oh, Graham must have tripped over my speed cable. So I went back and had my amp, and sure enough, that was speed cable. So I do the solo, and I do the whole thing, blah, 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 ended with my big noise sound that I always do. And then after my solo would be like his spot of the show, where we play his big hit, Seems to Be Gone. So I start playing his riff, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and all of a sudden guitar goes dead again. I see him come out of my amps. In other words, he pulled it out again, but this time he sabotaged himself, which is very strange. And so I basically, didn't bother plugging the guitar back in. I just told him, listen, what's up with this shit,
Right.
And he started yelling at me. He said, it's all you. And he pokes me in the stomach with his microphone, and I lost it and, gave him a knuckle sandwich, and that was the end of that.
No Parole from rock and roll is bizarre. It's somewhat discordant, simultaneously poppy and synth-driven, yet slathered in Yngwie Malmsteen's signature neoclassical affectations, with a latent prog metal underpinnings that eternally characterized Alcatrazz. There truly is nothing else that sounds quite like it in its genre. Like Van Halen having a gang fuck with Genesis Rainbow and Mozart, but the bottom line, it's good. Really fucking good, and you should listen to it. Next. With Yngwie's 10-story ego rampaging through downtown Tokyo in front of legions of fleeing Japanese, the search was on for a new Axeman, and as improbable as it was that Alcatrazz would stumble on one guitar legend, in defiance of all logic and probability, lightning struck twice when in walked former Frank Zappa guitarist Steve fucking Vai, a man every bit as eccentric as he was uniquely goddamn gifted.
Steve would say to me, what's this? What note is that? I said, I don't know. What is it? He said, that's an E. I said, what's this? That's an F. I said, how do you know all that? He said, well, Frank taught me how to hear every sound in the world has a note. It's music, everything, even stamp on the floor, all has a note. I've spoken to Steve a few years ago, and he said, do you know what my favorite album is? The one that you and I did together with the Alcatrazz band.
Yngwie having thrown one of his legendary temper tantrums and left in a huff, it was up to Steve Vai to learn the entire Alcatrazz set in just one fucking day, and then the band braced for perhaps one of the most galvanizing trials by fire in the annals of heavy metal.
Alcatrazz was out on the road, and Yngwie had just left the band, and they had this major show coming up, and his fans were like hardcore at the time. This was when he was coming to fruition. And I remember I was walking out on the stage and nobody knew that Yngwie wasn't in the band. I had learned the whole show in one day. And I'm walking out and I hear, Yngwie, Yngwie. So it was a unique moment. And when I went on stage, mouths dropped to the floor. I consider it a successful gig because nobody clapped, but nobody left.
Yngwie's a genius, but he had music of his own to make. Music that, as we learned in Metal Mythos number 2, is among the finest catalog of neoclassical power metal in history. In short, keeping Malmsteen in Alcatrazz would have been like putting a leash on a fucking cyclone. I'm glad he broke away, but the stylistic shift was every bit as apparent as it was immediate. Whereas Yngwie had been a neoclassical fucking blitzkrieg, and God bless him for it, Steve Vai was and is a more contemplative, technically minded player, unafraid to take his copious skills off display in service to the song. But the Malmsteen versus Vai debate really has no place here, because the simple fact is, Yngwie's great, but Steve Vai was good for Alcatrazz. The band moved into an even more progressive musical direction while simultaneously enhancing their commercial prospects, and perhaps best of all, Graham Bonnet no longer had to sing over Yngwie's wall of amps and ego. The dramatic difference in the quality of Bonnet's performance in a live setting is fucking jaw-dropping. Let's not even talk about Jeff Scott Soto vainly trying to sing Graham Bonnet's full-voiced, high F-sharp vocal parts and being forced to resort to his patented Muppet falsetto during his tour with Yngwie in '84. It's not easy being green. 1985's Disturbing the Peace consequently ranks at the band's creative and commercial zenith. 11 tracks of sleek, painstakingly produced prog, buffed to a glossy sheen beneath a keyboard-laden veneer of upbeat pop metal. Nobody seems to care. There's more for sale. She walks on the stage, strokes her hip, shakes her mane. Her sweet cheap perfume reminds them that she's one. Really, the only weak link here is a fallow bit of filler by the name of Breaking the Heart of the City, an unceremonious closing to an absolutely superb effort. With a unified front musically, personally, and creatively, it seemed Alcatrazz had finally arrived. And then Steve Vai's phone rang.
I use a lot of different voices. I have probably 3 or 4 voices that I use on our records anyway. But I have one voice I haven't used yet, and that's my operatic voice. God bless video.
Yngwie Malmsteen, Steve Vai, Danny Johnson?
You suck, McMahon!
While Alcatrazz had cranked out an album tailor-made for radio play, for whatever reason, success eluded the Vai incarnation of the band, and record company support virtually evaporated. It should surprise absolutely no one, then, that when Steve Vai's phone rang and David Lee Roth's voice was on the other end, Alcatrazz Mark II was effectively Splitsville. No acrimony this time, however. Steve Vai got along with Graham Bonnet just fine, and continues to praise the band's sophomore album as one of the finest offerings of his career.
And then with bands like, like Alcatrazz, it was a great experience, I learned band camaraderie, and touring and being with a band. With Frank, it was different. You were musicians and it was individual, but the guys in Alcatrazz, they were wonderful guys and we got along. And it was nice, nice kind of a family unit. I enjoyed that very much.
So out with Vai and in with Danny Johnson. Now, before you leap down the man's throat or burn him in effigy, Danny Johnson was and is a more than competent guitarist, serving admirable stints in Axis, Private Life, Alice Cooper, Today in Steppenwolf, and even Rod Stewart. You perhaps wouldn't count him among guitar legends like Yngwie or Steve Vai, but it could perhaps also be argued that had 1986's Dangerous Games album performed better, he very well may have.
My thing is, I'm a music guy. It's not how much guitar I play, it's how much guitar is needed. And in Alcatrazz, a lot of people don't realize they had a great singer. And in my opinion, Yngwie and Steve not really Steve, but I remember Graham Bonnet saying that Yngwie
would do a guitar solo standing in front of him when he was singing, and there was no guitar solo supposed to be there. I would never do that.
With a more subdued melodic approach than his predecessors, it's easy to forget just how competent his axe work truly is. Look, say what you will, his phrasing is pristine and his tone is motherfucking glorious. Danny Johnson isn't the problem here, nor is the musical approach, necessarily. The problem with Dangerous Games isn't that the band went melodic or radio-friendly, it's how they went melodic. For all their neoclassical prog metal underpinnings, whether it was Island in the Sun or God Bless Video, the band were radio-friendly from the outset. No, the operative malady here is that this band is so melodic, so pound me in the ass with an insulin syringe saccharin that it comes across as a callous cash grab by a band dripping with desperation, which is frankly batshit. The band formed in '83. Dangerous Games was released just 3 years later in '86. Alcatrazz had plenty of time to evolve naturally and achieve breakthrough playability without attempting such a calculated and cynical plea for the AOR market. Instead, they tried to hotshot, they got burned and broke up in all of 3 fucking years. But more than melodic, radio-friendly, or even cynical, the word that springs to mind when I think of Dangerous Games is motherfucking rushed. Anytime a band record a cover song, let alone more than one on a record, it means one of 2 things. Either the band are short on original ideas, or dropping trowel and making a transparent play for radio, or in the case of Dangerous Games, fucking both. Which isn't to say I hate it, not even remotely. I listen to it all the time, in fact. There's something infectious about Dangerous Games, from the booming synthcraft to the gated drums to the panther in a living room knocking a martini off a zebra print fucking couch cover art. Dangerous Games may well be the single most 1980s album ever released, and when it steers into the 80s skid, it emerges with forgotten classics like Undercover. Dangerous Games didn't flop like R. Kelly's dick on a preteen's chin simply because it was melodic. This album was left at the altar by the record company. Look, say what you will about Dangerous Games, but Alcatrazz had just released their most radio-friendly record to that point. That's where the record company is supposed to meet the band halfway and promote the ever-living shit out of it, yet the record company didn't spring for one promotional fucking video. In '86, the heyday of pop metal on MTV. Not one video, not one radio spot, and a tour schedule that was kneecapped before it got off the fucking ground. Fuck Capitol Records, and fuck EMI. You left money on the fucking table here and brought an untimely end to what could have been an all-time classic 80s metal band in the process. A band that has thankfully been resurrected in recent years as a Graham Bonnet side project. And Graham, buddy, if you're listening, release that new fucking album already. I've been waiting for that shit longer than The Last Guardian. I'm beginning to think it's a fucking mirage. Well, that does it for this abridged edition of the Mythos. I live in hope I've converted many an Alcatrazz skeptic with today's episode. Until the next time I emerge from the mists of the Metal Mythos, I'm Razor Fist. God fucking speed.
You've worked with quite a few of famous guitar players.
A few, yes.
Yeah, maybe a couple egos?
Not really. Not the people you would expect had egos.
No?
One did, who shall remain Malmsteen.
And nobody's surprised with that.
Yeah, no.
He doesn't like donuts.
No, he doesn't know.
I don't like fucking donuts, alright? Hostile.